Welcome into a football show Thursday edition, filling in once again for Braden Gall, who continues to evade the new league year and all the craziness, like signing Blake Hance to a one-year deal. Instead of talking about that, how dare he leave us, myself, and Nick Suss to talk about the Titans? Spend time with your family, or talk about Blake Hance to the Titans. What would you rather do, Nick? I think I know my answer, but you know.
I know my family is already talking about Blake Hance, so it's kind of like a 6 or 1/2 situation. But
There you go.
whichever way you do it, yeah.
Yes, I am JT Ruhnke, host of the Hot Read podcast, filling in for him today. That is Nick Suss of the Tennessean, beat reporter for the Tennessee Titans. We are brought to you by Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willies. And unlike Monday's show, I this entire week has been a whirlwind of a week. I felt like the mood swings with every signing has just hit me back and forth, going which way or another. I felt like on Monday and Tuesday, this team didn't feel like they had a clear vision for what they wanted to do with a couple of their signings. And then you have yesterday with the transactions that they do, and I'm like all the way back in. Like, I see the vision. It only takes one guard and one safety to put me back on track, and that's what the first week of free agency is all about. What have we learned about the vision for the 2025 Tennessee Titans is what I want to talk about today. What are some of the additions and subtractions telling us about where this team is headed for 2025 and beyond? And I think you have to start with that conversation by talking about how they essentially, like, in the newer Star Wars, where Adam Driver is Kylo Ren, is talking to Daisy Ridley's Rey and is saying, you're holding on to the past. Let go. And that seems to be what the Titans are really doing by letting go of some guys like Harold Landry, NWI, Jack Gibbons, Kenneth Murray, Ryan Stonehouse, Luke Gifford. They're letting the past die, the past being the early 2020s Titans. They're blowing it up. It's going back down to the studs. And Mike Borgonzi, Chad Brinker are rebuilding this roster and kind of resetting it, in my opinion. Is that kind of how you see it as well, Nick? Or do you see them going in a little bit of a different direction?
Let me first say I should have cut you off. I have no idea what Star Wars quote you're making, so that was news to me. I did not know that they let the old ways die in the new Star Wars movies.
Have you seen the new Star Wars movies?
I saw 7. I didn't bother seeing 8 or 9.
Well, that's why it's from 8.
So. But I would say the two takeaways I have right now are: one, the Titans do not want to be bad in the same way twice, and two, the Vrabel years are behind us to the point you're alluding to. I think it is quite easy to see that the shedding happening is more related to people who played under previous management, whether it's Rand Carthon, whether it's Mike Vrabel, but the people who subscribed to the previous identity are being phased out and are being replaced with people who have either experienced this current identity before or who are young enough to be molded in the new identity. So with the offensive line, we can get into Eddie's comment and whether or not this is a trade for Cam Ward or whatever it is. Like, irrespective of that, the thing that's happening right now is the Titans are saying, this is what we stunk at last year. We're not going to do that again. And that's why this move is starting with the offensive line. That is why, even if we're only fixing one thing, let's fix the thing we were worst at. So I think that's good. It's admirable to say we're not going to do the same thing twice, or in the Titans' case, 4 times it would be of not fixing the offensive line if they didn't fix it this year. But there is still much, much work to be done across the rest of the roster.
Yes, I agree with you there. No more trying to cut corners, I think, is one of the best ways to say it. They're resetting their line, special teams unit, receiving core. A lot of that is being reset, whether that is through the supplemental pieces they're signing or when we get to the draft in late April. That that seems to be the motto here. And we can start with the biggest thing that Mike Borgonzi, Chad Brinker, and Brian Callahan have emphasized the importance of in terms of areas they want to get better and deeper. It's in the trenches. And we saw where they attacked it the most is the offensive line, with essentially an entire new revamped offensive line. You had basically two spots to fill on the offensive line, being right guard and right tackle. And you essentially get three new players at those positions. Dan Moore Jr., the first signing, the biggest signing the Titans have made to play left tackle. You have J.C. Latham by virtue of signing Dan Moore, moving to right tackle. And then the signing of Kevin Zeitler makes your offensive line look like so. Dan Moore at left, Peter Skoronski at left guard, eventually Lloyd Cushenberry back at center. Will he be ready for the beginning of the season? I think that's still very much up in the air. Kevin Zeitler, veteran presence that line probably desperately needed at right guard, and then J.C. Latham back at right tackle. You also have guys like Blake Hance signing as a depth piece, probably to play that Leroy Watson versatile role, maybe a little better, hopefully. And then you have the cast of characters that you've come to know and hate from last year: John Ojukwu, NPF, Jalen Duncan, Andrew Rupsich, all guys who add depth here. Before we talk about the line as a whole, I do want to get your thoughts on Dan Moore signing a 4-year, $82 million deal, $50 million of that guaranteed. And there's been a lot of talk from, Pittsburgh Steelers and analysts, Titans analysts, people who have watched the film. The consensus on a guy like Dan Moore seems to be all over the map. He sucks. He's good. I've come to, when you read between the lines, it seems like when he is playing some of his best ball, is it worthy of, top left tackle dollar? No. But at the end of the day, if you're getting league average left tackle play from Dan Moore this season, while also fixing your right tackle solution by moving J.C. Latham over there, I feel like that's a win in my book. Like, solidify both positions, even if it isn't, at an insanely high level of maybe, having J.C. Latham play left tackle, drafting a guy to play right. Like, just getting those two positions solid, I think, is worth it in the long run. Is it an overpay, in my opinion? Yes, but I think it's a necessary thing that they had to do.
Yeah, people who know me, people who've heard me talk about this sort of stuff, know that I'm a remarkably consistent person with takes. And so at this time last year, JT, you probably heard me saying something like, the Titans don't need J.C. Latham to be great. They need him to be average. Average is a whole reinvention of this team. The Titans don't need Dan Moore to be great. They need Dan Moore to be average. And if Dan Moore is average, which last year we can say he was roughly average to below average in a really weird offense, if he's average in this offense, that's a significant upgrade. I do want to push back on this weird idea that I've seen floated around and that you just mentioned of the Titans are really getting 3 new offensive linemen to start because J.C. Latham's trading positions. That's like buying one sandwich, cutting it in half, and saying, I have 2 sandwiches. No, you have one sandwich. You just cut it in half. J.C. Latham isn't a new player. He's playing a different position. He is moving over to right tackle. But you are getting J.C. Latham. If he's at left tackle, if he's at right tackle, you're getting J.C. Latham. So you're getting J.C. Latham at right tackle. Is he going to be better at right tackle? I don't know. I think he's going to be better just because he's year 2 in the pros. Let's not revisionist history this thing. We all thought J.C. Latham was the second coming for 10 weeks last year. And then for the last 7 weeks of the season, he struggled. That happens with rookies every year. Not every rookie does it, but many, many rookies hit that rookie wall. And so J.C. Latham, he was a bust. He gave up so many sacks. All of those sacks were confined to that really late stretch of the season. So if he gets better, it's not some gigantic commentary on, he should have been a right tackle all along. It could just be a commentary on dudes get better at tackle as they get older. And so is he a more natural right tackle? Potentially. Is playing next to Kevin Zeitler going to help him? I would imagine so. That's a really veteran, wily, smart presence who's going to help him on the offensive line.
Next to Penei Sewell.
And so you put all that together, I do think JC Latham's going to be better. I don't think it's because, they failed to find a great tackle in the draft. I think it's just the options available. They found a left tackle. And Dan Moore is a natural left tackle. Is he a great left tackle? Should he be making Jordan Mailata money? No. Like, call a spade there. But he is going to, if he is average, this is a B+ signing. Like, good job. If he's below average and you just gave out $82 million or whatever it is to a guy who's going to give up double-digit sacks, bad. But, like, they don't make these decisions based off of the expectation that he's going to be himself at his worst. Grant him the opportunity to see if he gets better. This isn't Andre Dillard. This is a guy who has a track record. So let's see what he does before we cast aspersions at him.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that's where the criticism will come in the hardest, is if he is not playing to at least a consistent level of league average. That $31 million guarantee may come back to haunt the narratives of this front office in year one for Mike Borgonzi. However, I do agree with you. But you need both tackles. Like, this has been a long time coming narrative that both tackle positions are equally as important. And if you can get average to above average play at both, it probably, the return on investment is huge there. And as Joe says here in the comments, tackle in the NFL is really hard. Like, the people who were saying JC Latham was a bust because he kind of came back down to earth and was a rookie last year, I found that always ridiculous, because it is hard. Even though you're playing at an SEC level, playing tackle at the NFL level is hard. Coach Wills also says the Nick Saban philosophy, it's easy to make players, okay players great versus, bad players good. I think you have some traits that Bill Callahan can work with in a Dan Moore to make him, an average player great. Daniel says Dan Moore's pass rush win rate was better than Ronnie Stanley. Like, there's things to like. And like, the Steelers offense and how they ran that is always an interesting one with what they have to going on up there. But I think
Mason Rudolph to Pittsburgh.
Mason Rudolph to Pittsburgh.
Mike Garafolo reporting.
So that we're about to get into the QB conversation, because that was one of the options I was going to bring up. What do they do with the quarterback position? We heard the reports earlier this week that the Titans may be interested. Well, we've heard reports all along, even going back to the combine, that Mason Rudolph was, or at least the Titans were interested in Mason Rudolph returning. I had heard that it was a long shot for Mason to come back. I think the situation that the Titans are in is probably not somewhere that Mason wants to play again in a rebuild. So I didn't see the fit ever returning. He ends up not going to staying in Nashville. He instead goes back to Pittsburgh, where he'll probably join up with Aaron Rodgers and maybe one of the most interesting quarterback rooms we've seen in a long time. But getting back to the offensive line discussion here, Kevin Zeitler, you bring him in, 35 years old, 1 year, $9 million. Just like you talked about Dan Moore being available and consistent, playing over 1,100 snaps at left tackle last season. Kevin Zeitler playing over 1,000 offensive snaps in 2024, 18 total pressures in 24 per PFF. This is a home run signing that I was hoping that they would go out and get one of these veteran guys. I think he brings a lot of experience, leadership on that offensive line that it now is desperately missing. I think putting him next to JC Latham is a huge plus. And like you said, you're getting dependable, durable play on the offensive line. Dan Moore, 66 of 68 possible games played. That's good for 97% in his 4-year career so far.
He also started every game his last 3 years at Texas A&M. Like 7 straight years, he's missed 2 starts.
That's very dependable. And of course, the Titans curse is going to come back to haunt them, and he's probably going to miss 9 games this year. Kevin Zeitler, though, 198 of 212 possible games played in his long career. That's 93%. He's been in the league for a long time, since 2012, and he's played 93% of his games, including 1,000 snaps last year. This feels like a movement for the Titans to get dependable play. Maybe you're not hitting up on the upside of like all pro caliber play, but you're getting guys who you know are going to be dependable and consistent and are going to be there for you game in and game out, hopefully, on the offensive line. So you're not having what you had last year of you have NPF and John Ojukwu and Jalen Duncan and the other Cincinnati guy, I forget his name already because he was so irrelevant. Arlington Hambright was another one. The one who played in the Super Bowl, who had a 2.0 PFF grade in the Super Bowl, playing right tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals. The point is, they had so many guys basically being a turnstile, both off the field and on the field for the Titans on the offensive line, that, like we said, you're getting it. You're stop cutting corners at this point. You're getting guys in here who can be dependable and can be available for you. And I think that's more important than maybe the upside of a rookie or going out and trading for a guy at this point in the life cycle of where the Tennessee Titans are.
The best thing you can do for an offensive lineman is never have to talk about them ever. And I think Kevin Zeitler is like a Hall of Fame, never talked about dude.
Yep.
Like if you told me he retired 3 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, good for him. It's a long career, 10 years as a guard in the NFL. But now you're looking at a guy who is age 35, age 36 season. He's heading into his 13th or 14th year in the league. He has, in the last 4 years, spent a lot of time around winning football with Baltimore and Detroit. Obviously, when he was in Cincinnati early in his career, he was around a lot of playoff teams. Like he has seen success. He knows how to kind of shepherd in the younger players on this team. But I'll also say, I don't think that signing Kevin Zeitler precludes the Titans from going out and drafting a guard in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. No. This is a 1-year deal. You can bring him back on a 1-year deal 3 times in a row if he keeps playing. But like, I think that there are a lot of interesting interior offensive linemen in the 5th, 6th round range who the Titans could very much be like, okay, instead of having to use a pick on a 2nd round guard now or a 3rd round guard, you can sit back, take a developmental option in the 6th, and instead of like Jalen Duncan, oh gosh, now he has to start as a rookie, this guy can sit for a year or two, can learn the craft, and then kind of in a way that an Aaron Brewer or a Nate Davis did, eventually step in as a late round to undrafted kind of interior offensive lineman and get the thing you need from both of these guys. So I think that they're at a much healthier position offensive line wise. Defensive line, we can still talk about what we think about is happening on the pass rush, but half of the build through the trenches philosophy, I think they have put a check mark there.
Yeah, I would agree there. Eddie's saying they probably need a right guard in the 4th to start a plan behind Zeitler, but if this was Madden and I could turn injuries off, I think it's a solid line. I agree with you there. Hey, I'm on board. Clay Webb in the 6th from Jacksonville State. Sign me up, and you're good to go for 10 years, I think, learning behind a guy like Kevin Zeitler.
Yeah, I think in my mock draft today, I had Joshua Gray out of Oregon State, the former tackle turned guard, is just like go get him. Get somebody like that. That's totally available.
Jackson Slater, as well as Joe says, like on the Hot Read podcast, there's been so much talk about wanting to talk about these day 3 tackles. Like people are like, when are we going to start talking about the day 3 tackles? And now I think we're at a point where we're hitting the convergence line where it is now the only thing we have to talk about is day 3 tackles, which makes everybody happy. So that's exciting. Like you said, the defensive line is another story, but I do want to bring back this idea of, and we can talk about it as we get into the quarterbacks here. Does this feel like, with building this offensive line, does this feel like a gear up towards Cam Ward at 1, or is this simply getting the offensive line right? There's no question that they still do need to bring in another quarterback. my list that I had here was Mason Rudolph, Jameis Winston, Carson Wentz, Gardner Minshew, Drew Lock are probably the top 5 available, who are most likely still available to any team, not just a couple suitors in the Cleveland Browns, New York Giants, and Pittsburgh Steelers to bring in. That list is now down to 4, as you said, and it was just reported Mason Rudolph is going back to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That list is now down to Jameis Winston, Carson Wentz, Gardner Minshew, and Drew Lock. Could they bring in another guy like a Kyle Allen, someone who has worked with, or Kyle Allen or Brandon Allen? One of the two Allens has worked with Brian Callahan before in Cincinnati. I think he could be a long shot option, but to me, I'm subscribing to this idea that this doesn't indicate anything in terms of what they do at 1. Either way, whoever is playing quarterback, you have to get your offensive line right at some point. If there was like, I don't think there's any way that signing a guy like Dan Moore and Kevin Zeitler can say like there's something in their game that makes it so that Cam Ward is going to be unbeatable or anything like that. This is just simply a philosophy of get your offensive line right so you don't get your quarterback, whoever that may be, killed as much as the quarterbacks here have been killed the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask this as a yes/no question. We don't have to linger on it. But so who are the 4 you have? Lock, Minshew, Flacco, and Winston?
I had Winston, Wentz, Minshew,
not
and
Flacco.
Lock.
Okay.
You could throw Joe Flacco in there if you want.
If you want those to be the 5, yes or no? Are these guys upgrades from Will Levis, or are they just different people than Will Levis? Like, is it just get a guy who is not Will? Because at this point, if you're getting a guy who is of equal caliber to the guy, just keep the guy. Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Is the difference just he's not the same person anymore?
I don't know. There's a couple quarterbacks I like. I think at the end of the day, they're probably just different people than Will Levis. Joe says Flacco is an upgrade in his opinion. I don't know if Joe Flacco at age, 75? No, not really. 40 or something like that right now is, I do think they have to bring in someone, as Daniel says, for competition. So I think they do bring in another quarterback at some point here, but I don't think it says anything for the offensive line. I think it's just a matter of getting the offensive line right. Yeah. I'm still of the idea that it's Cam Ward at 1. I think that's where we post combine have been. That is where this ship is headed. Whether that is the right way to build this team or not is another discussion. But I think it's where we are now with this team. I think you're setting him up for, getting him in the building with a solid, dependable offensive line, building the weapons through the draft around him in rounds 4 and 5. Maybe if you pick up an extra third, building around there and resetting that wide receiver core, getting Will Levis the competition, and going from there, I think is where this team is at right now.
Yeah, it's such a strange situation here because the one thing that we're not trying to talk about that I think everybody wants to hear be talked about is if it's not Cam Ward, what's the goal? Like what is the objective for this season? Because I agree. Since we got back from the combine, I think that people who listen to the show know pre-combine I was probably like 60% they trade it, 40% they pick Cam Ward. Now I'm probably closer to 60% Cam Ward, 40% trade. But if it's not Cam, if you're trading down to get Abdul Carter or to get Travis Hunter, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here? What is the plan? Because then you're talking about Will Levis. Then you're talking about Gardner Minshew. Then you're talking about Drew Lock or Trey Lance maybe, or any of these guys who are available. You're not talking about guys who are going to be long-term solutions. The closest thing you'd have to a long-term solution would be Levis, given year 2 of the system. You're betting on the talent there.
You're betting on the work he's doing this offseason as well. Yeah.
So we can talk about, are these moves telegraphing what they're going to do? We can talk about that or the other. I think what we have to talk about is, are these moves telegraphing what they're going to do depending on the branches. So if it's Cam Ward, what do these moves say about what they think of the team? If it's not Cam Ward, what do these moves say about what they think about the team? On that just dichotomy, if it's Cam Ward, I feel pretty confident that they're just saying, well, let's build the offense first. And we'll try and get some young players in on defense in the second, third, fourth rounds if we have picks there, and going to try and do this, that, and the other to mitigate some of the defensive issues, because there is talent there. You've got defensive interior talent, you've got cornerback talent, you've got safety talent, all this stuff. Okay, so get the offense first. You draft a quarterback, you draft a receiver, you're looking at a receiving core of, let's say, Calvin Ridley, a second-round receiver, Van Jefferson, Bryce Oliver. It's not great, but it can do, especially if that second-round receiver is somebody like Luther Burden or Emeka Ibuka, who falls into the second. I don't expect either of them to fall into the second round, but given that that's a possibility, some people say, if it's that, oh, good, you feel good about that. If it's not, maybe you go sign Rondale Moore or Olamide Zaccheaus or Elijah Moore or one of these slot types to just kind of fill out the receiving core next to Calvin Ridley. Use a 5th round pick on Kyle Williams or something to be a Calvin Ridley
Bryant,
clone.
someone like that.
Yeah. You do that sort of stuff, and then you've got Cam Ward and a revamped offensive line, and you got 2 running backs you like, and that's a solid offense. That's worth trying, and you kick the can on the defense to next year. If it's not Cam Ward, if it's Abdul Carter, if it's Travis Hunter, you have just built up an offensive line, including a 1-year rental of Kevin Zeitler, without having improved the offense, because you don't have improved quarterback play. And your receiver core is worse than it was at the start of last season, and you just don't have any consistency there. And you're improving the defense, but the defense isn't necessarily the problem. Like, the pass rush is a problem, but you go get Abdul Carter, you've got 1 pass rusher. You still need 2 more. Draymond Jones is a good pass rusher situationally, but he is not like a every down pass rush threat. So you look at this thing. If it's not Cam Ward, you ask the question, what was the goal of these short-term contracts? Versus if it is Cam Ward, oh, I see the goal of the short-term contracts.
Yeah. I mean, it is playing very much into the idea of like a Washington Commanders type role, where you have a lot of these 1-year guys. Like, I think that's the best way to say it. And Joe says, with Zeitler on a 1-year deal, I don't want to waste him on a scrub quarterback like that, I guess, whether it be Will Levis, Drew Lock, Jameis Winston, any guy that you bring in. I think they do end up bringing one in just because. However, I think there is a better outcome of waiting on a like I think you said it best. Like, you can get away with waiting on the defense in terms of the edge, because there were times last year where this defense was pretty good, even with the edge rushers they had at their disposal last year, with a Harold Landry and Arden Key in that rotation of guys behind him, like a Jalen Harrell. Like, there were times that that defense was good. And if you get Snead playing back at the level that he can play, I think that can do a lot for your defense. Yeah. But like you said, if you elect to go with Abdul Carter, it makes the offensive moves look really suspect. And I think that's where we can see this headed. It doesn't mean that the offensive line is built for Cam, but the moves being made signal that this is what they want to address first. And I think that's probably the right way to go in the end there.
And to Mr. Blacko's point here about the edge in the second round, I think it is incredibly likely, given the way draft dynamics tend to work, that one of the 3 between like Nick Scorton, James Pierce, and Donovan Izaraku falls into 35. Like, I have a hard time believing that 8 edge rushers are going to go in the first round. Maybe they do, but I think that you're going to have a first round value at 35 at the edge rusher market. The question is, do you want to do that if you don't go get a true number 2 receiver? Is somebody like Trey Harris going to be deemed worth it, even if he might be much lower on your board, because the need is more pressing and you need to surround Cam Ward with more if you draft Cam Ward. Then you can also look at the Commanders' strategy of who was their number 2 receiver last year. Like, it was Terry McLaurin and who else?
They got rid of their number 2 very early in the season with Jahan Dotson and made it Diami Brown. They used Zach Ertz a lot. They used Olamide Zaccheaus. They had Noah Brown. Like that. Yeah, I think I think that's a really good point, that they didn't exactly have a number 2. And so I think that's where you get into the discussion of, is trading back at 2 with having a guy like there. Personally, if you have a guy like Ezeraku there, that's an A+ draft for me, in my opinion. If you take Cam and you get Ezeraku at 35, I think that sets your team up better than any trade back in the second could, if he is there. I'm with you on that, which I think can, D Good also saying the Titans could go pander with James Pierce, and
sure, but
they could do that.
Name me one time when the Titans have ever drafted an undersized but athletic, productive edge rusher out of Boston College in the second round who had a first-round grade but fell into the second round. Like, it seems a little too convenient.
As I said at the Combine, they just need to get rid of their Boston College edge rusher and replace him with a Boston College edge rusher, and you're fine. And everything, the cycle completes itself, essentially, and starts anew.
I like Ezeraku for the production aspect of it. He was incredibly productive. I also like James Pierce for the production aspect of it. Dude was always in the backfield.
Very versatile.
Obviously their trajectories are going very opposite directions, but I think that if they're both on the board, Titans are going to pick one of them at 35. Like, you can't pass up that sort of talent.
Yeah, I agree with you there, which can turn our discussion now to the defensive side of the ball. Before we do that, though, have to give a shout out to our sponsor, Sinkers Beverages, 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year in East Nashville, serving that community for over 40 years, and for good reason, because they simply have the best selection of beer, wine, and spirits in the Nashville area. Got to check them out. And when you do, go up and sign up for their in-crowd promotional system, where you get all of their benefits, allocations, and tastings that you can only know about when you sign up for the in-crowd. If you can't make it out there, don't worry. They have you covered. Simply search Sinkers on Uber Eats, and they deliver the booze to you. They drive so you can drink. Also, check out Bluegrass Beverages in the Hendersonville area, who have been serving that location and area for over 50 years. Shotgun Willie's Barbecue, also located in East Nashville. Some of the best barbecue in Nashville. I had the wonderful and amazing privilege to get their Thanksgiving spread when they were doing that. That was the last time I had their brisket. Absolutely delicious. Some of the best. They're doing it right over there, and you got to go check them out. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue for sponsoring the show. Also have to say that I finally found out the name of the offensive lineman that I was missing, and it was by way of Paul Kaharski, other 440 Sports member here, who from the shadows just texted me out of nowhere. Isaiah Prince. That was the guy I was missing at the right tackle carousel. Isaiah Prince. So that's glad I don't have to talk about that anymore. Think about that, because we can think about the defensive line, which, listen, I still don't know exactly what the plan is there. And if you're talking about pushing the can down the road, maybe you find a guy like Ezeraku who does end up falling to you at 35, and I think my worries are a little less at that point. But currently, what the work they've done on the defensive line is re-signing Sebastian Joseph Day, something I think they needed to do to support that interior. I think he's a good locker room presence. I think he was a fine role player for them last year. And then they signed Dermont Jones from Seattle on a 1-year, $10 million deal. He has the versatility to play on inside and the outside. Consensus on where he's better at, I think, is mixed. I think you ultimately can put him into the mold of a Danico Autry, where he can play both positions. Whether he's better at the inside or outside is up to debate. But I think what this sets you up for is that you most likely rotate him with Arden Key on one side, and you have the draft pick on the other. And I think they still need more help. I think there's most likely a couple more signings, a couple more 1-year deals on some flyers to build up the depth of that position. Could they double up on the draft? I think there are more moves coming, because Dermont Jones and re-signing Sebastian Joseph Day with just one draft pick, I don't think moves the needle enough for me to say that this edge position has been revamped completely. But I think it's a step in the right direction to create a rotational style system where you can get the best of the guys you're bringing in. You can get the best of what Arden Key can bring to your team, maybe not being that 3-down player, and then also getting younger at the position through the draft or signing some of these younger depth pieces to 1 or 2 year deals, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, people have heard me say this before. I don't want to be a broken record, but like, look, if you are looking for a transformative presence off of the edge, 4 times out of 5, roughly 80% of the time, you're going to need to pick that guy in the top 10. So that is the argument for Abdul Carter, is that the best edge rushers in the league are guys like Myles Garrett, who went first, and Nick Bosa, who went second, and Micah Parsons, who went, 10th, 11th, maybe? He was on the low side of that range. Every once in a while, you'll get a Max Crosby who goes in the 4th round. But almost exclusively, when you are looking for the actual superstar edge rusher type, it's easy to know that Bruce Smith should be drafted 1st overall. That's why he was drafted 1st overall. It's easy to know that Lawrence Taylor should have been a top 5 pick. That's why I think he was picked 2nd or whatever he was picked back then. Like, we have known since the dawn of the modern NFL draft scouting that unmissable edge rushers are the easiest position to evaluate. If you look at the last 10 first edge rushers off the board, the worst of those 10 was Dante Fowler. Like, you're looking at Dante Fowler and Trayvon Walker, who are perennial 10-sack-a-year guys, as your worst candidate. So, like, if you're trying to find one of those bona fide superstars off the edge, you're probably not going to be able to patch that together. But what you can patch together is 3 or 4 guys who can get you 7 to 12 sacks. And I think that's a valiant plan worth trying for. You draft somebody in the 2nd round, whether it's the 3 guys we mentioned earlier, or it's somebody like Princely Umanmielen, or one of those 2nd-tier guys who you can get at 35, or you can trade back to 42 and something and get and that sort of stuff. And then you go back into the 4th, 5th round, and Ashton Jalott, or Kamon Rucker, or what's the kid out of Braden Swinson out of LSU? Like, you'll have some guys in there that you can patch this together and make it work. And I think that's really worth addressing. Like, that's an important thing to do, because I would make the argument that after quarterback, edge rusher is the 2nd most important position on the football field. You can make an argument for tackle. I think Titans fans would happily make an argument for tackle. But if you can't affect the other team's quarterback, it doesn't matter how good your corners are. They're going to find openings eventually. And I think that's what was exposed about the Titans late last season, is that they had really good corners, and they continue to have really good corners. But if a quarterback's got 3, 4, 5 seconds to throw every play, somebody's going to get open.
Yeah.
So you got to go get somebody, whether it's another free agent, whether it's Fowler, or who else is still available. Emmanuel Ogbah, I think, is unsigned. And you have some of these edge talents who are veterans. You can go get on a 1-year deal, kind of the edge rush equivalent of Kevin Zeitler. But I don't think you're going to get that transformative guy by luck. Like, you're going to have to patch this together.
Yeah, I agree. There. They need to double up. I think the 2 positions that you most likely see them double up are edge and receiver, just because of where they are. You want to get younger. You're not going to find, just by way of where they are right now in the draft, you're not going to find those kind of maybe franchise changing guys at wide receiver and edge in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th. You're going to find good players who are, can maybe turn into something. Maybe you hit on a couple of them, but I think they're going to be consistent in their first year. And I think that's what you need right now on that defensive line, and what you need at the wide receiver position. if nothing else, because I think that's a step in the right direction. But they need to get more help there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To just clean up a comment here, to the point of the elite edge rushers don't win Super Bowls. Not so sure about that. Von Miller kind of single-handedly won a Super Bowl for the Broncos not too long ago, and Reggie White won a bunch of Super Bowls, and Lawrence Taylor won a couple of Super Bowls, and even like Terrell Suggs won Super Bowl, and like they're top shelf edge rushers that help their teams win Super Bowls. Like it's an important position.
Yeah, and that leads us to the inside linebacker position, which I think is
less
whirlwind of a day. Less important, but I still think, needs to be addressed here. Cody Barton, another guy who they sign, who is durable, dependable, 95 of 100 possible games played. For all of you non-math people out there, that's 95%.
Give or take
a few games there. I said I was lukewarm on this signing. I said that he does a lot of the things that Kenneth Murray does, but better. Like, I think he's a better player than Kenneth Murray. But at the time, I was saying, why have two Kenneth Murrays in this situation? And now they have no Kenneth Murrays anymore, as they trade. Or I guess they don't have any Kenneth Murrays by name anymore, as he is traded to Dallas along with a 7th for a 25-6th. I thought that, as a guy who thought Kenneth Murray could very much be a cap casualty, I'm more than happy that they get something for him than just cutting him. He ends up headed to Dallas. People are saying now you have another hole at interior linebacker. I think, to me, this is an indication that either they're going out and drafting a guy, which I think is still very possible on day 3 with one of their 4th round picks, one of their 4th, 5th, or 6th picks. I do think this also means that if you have Cody Barton being your more 3-down player, I think this is an indication of how they feel about a guy like Otis Reese, maybe getting Cedric Gray in year 2 to step up a little bit more, what they think of James Williams. I think they still need to address depth there, and I think they do it by way of maybe another signing later on in free agency, as we get into the dog days of the NFL season, and you see some of those flyer signings come off the board as people are looking for homes in the NFL. But I do think they also maybe spend a pick here, or sign a couple UDFAs to compete in camp. I'm not too concerned about Cody Barton and one of these other guys playing at the inside linebacker position. Like you said, a much less important position than the edge rusher. However, I think Cody Barton is an upgrade over what you had in Kenneth Murray. And if you can get one of these other guys like an Otis Reese or Cedric Gray or even James Williams or whoever you bring in to develop in year 2, or in the case of Otis Reese, year 3, I think you're still fine at the position.
Not to do that thing I do where my voice gets squeaky because I'm pretending to be angry, but like fallacy that annoys me about like team building and defense and stuff. How many guys aren't like Kenneth Murray? Like, how many linebackers in the NFL truly are like, I'm a coverage specialist. I go out there and I rove in the zone and I play Tampa. Like, there's like 4 of them. Like, oh, go draft a linebacker in the 4th round. Read any scouting report on a day 3 linebacker, and I can tell you with a friggin' certainty that it's going to say thumper, loves to fit in run stop, a bit of a liability in coverage, maybe needs to make his home as a special teamer. Name a day 3 linebacker, that's going to be his scouting report. Name a free agent linebacker who's available this year. Like, who was the great coverage guy that you could have gone out and gotten? Greenlaw, maybe?
Yeah, that's the one I was saying. Yeah. That was my argument on Tuesday's show before they moved on from Kenneth Murray. I was like, I get why they did it, because the money is the money, and he didn't play last year, and I get it. But also, I've seen what teams have done against this linebacking core in the past. But
the mechanism of modern football is that running backs and tight ends and slot receivers are getting more and more athletic, and offenses are getting better at exploiting light boxes. So you have running backs who can run straight through a light box, And you have skill guys who can absolutely expose linebackers. And teams have to make this choice. Do I put a skinny, athletic linebacker on the field and give up against the run? Or do I go out and get a run thumper linebacker who can, hold up against the run, but can't cover the tight ends and the running backs? And again, there's like 4 or 5 guys in the whole NFL who you can trust to do both. And if you find one of those guys, if you have Fred Warner or Jack Campbell or one of these guys that you really, really love who can do it all at linebacker, sure, that's great. But if we're using, oh, he's another Kenneth Murray as some sort of like incendiary comment, yeah, like 80% of linebackers in the NFL, they play linebacker because that's what they're good at. They're good at stopping the run. If they were good at coverage, they'd lose 10 pounds and play safety. Like, that's just what happens here. Let's not pretend that, oh, every linebacker should be expected to be good. It's rare. And Cody Barton, he's fine in coverage. Like, let's not say he's bad. He intercepts passes. He deflects passes. Like, he's got a good nose for the football. Maybe he's not got the greatest, like, recovery timing, but, like, he'll be around the football in coverage. He's not going to be a complete liability. And also, it's the least important position on the defense. So if your 11th best player is going to be an inside linebacker, good, that's how it should be. So, like, I'm not overly concerned. If it's a weakness and you're getting exploited because of that, you're a pretty darn good team.
Yeah, I think so as well. And maybe that's why they have a guy like James Williams, who they're maybe hoping can take a year 2 leap. Although, I'm not. I think I'm with you. I think at this point, I'm okay with having one of these guys take a year 2 step, finding a guy in the 4th, 5th. I really do think that this team, if Cedric Gray can reach the potential that he potentially had coming out last year, I think you're set at the linebacker position. If you can get Cedric Gray to play like that. That it's a big if, but he's fine.
What I compare it to a lot is when I used to cover baseball, I'd get tweets and angry emails all the time of like, why can't our 9-hole hitter hit? Like, that's why he's hitting 9th. Like, that's what your 9-hole hitter does, is he does other things. If your linebacker can't cover, if he's the worst player on your defense, and teams are like, oh, we're going to exploit the linebacker, that means you got a good defense, because they're not exploiting the corner. They're not exploiting the defensive, like the things that are easy to exploit are like, let's just block that defensive tackle out of the way and we've got a hole, or let's just throw it on that corner and we got a first down. Like, if you're having to scheme to exploit a linebacker, the rest of your defense is fine.
Daniel says, wasn't Gray supposed to be the cover linebacker prospect? Yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, if he can be good, like if he can hit that top potential that he has, I think you're cooking with gas here. As Joe says, linebacker is a non-premium position that is easily replaceable in the draft. Do I think they spend a pick? I think it's plausible. I think it's one of those where you're going to see the Titans draft, they have 8 picks, right? You're thinking quarterback, you're thinking potentially 2 edge rushers, 2 wide receivers, and that leaves you with 3 picks. And I think, that's the top of it. Like, if they double up on edge and double up on receiver, that's 3 other picks to address. They probably take an offensive lineman somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if they look at this tight end group and say, we're willing to take a swing on one of these tight ends on day 3, and then take a swing on one of these linebackers, and then go into UDFA and find one of these running backs who is probably worth being drafted and just doesn't.
I like the running backs a lot more than I like the tight ends. I'd be willing to take a running back and go sign Nick Vannett again, or somebody of that caliber as your 3rd tight end, but 6 or 1 half.
That's not.
It doesn't matter.
I agree. It's not gospel. Like, I could have said running back and changed tight end interchangeably. Like they do. I think they do end up using like 3 of their 8 picks on non-premium positions like that, and I think it's worth it in the end. Where you don't,
depending on where they go with the offensive line, it could only be 2. Like, if they pick an extra tackle,
yeah. And this leads to the one area of the field where I'm pretty confident that they are not going to be looking at anywhere in the draft, and it may be a surprise, which is the secondary at this point. I mean, you're signing of Xavier Woods, another guy who is dependable, has played 123 of the 132 possible games, good for 93%. He's a guy who was a full-time starter for the Carolina Panthers last year. He is the guy that is going to be with Amani Hooker. I think he's fine. I think he's dependable. That really solidifies your secondary group of your four corners, your four starting corners in Sneed, Awuzie, Brownlee, McCreary, and you have Darrell Baker Jr. as your fifth depth guy. That's a deep room that I like. Your safety room, could they end up taking a day 3 safety? I don't think it's out of the question. It's another one of those non-premium that you could throw in with those 3 picks there, or 2 picks if they go tackle as well, where they do end up taking a safety. But right now you have Xavier Woods, Amani Hooker, Mike Brown. I think you're fine in the secondary. If you can get Sneed to play back at that level that we know he can, and you're hearing from this team that they feel confident that he can get back to that, I think you're pretty much set at that position, and you're feeling really, really good, regardless of if you don't have that much depth at the safety position.
Yeah, and I'll say 2 things to this. One, cornerback secondary, most famously the most volatile position, year-over-year results for players. Like, I don't think Chidobe Awuzie has played consecutive seasons in his career where his targeted passer rating against was within 30 points of the previous season. Like, it's just, corners are going to have good years and bad years. It's a really tough position. With safety, with Xavier Woods, talking to people about him since he's been signed or agreed to sign, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
The profile on him is he's the quiet, laid back, keeps to himself, lead by example, veteran old head type in the room.
Yeah.
And if you're expecting like rah energy guy, he's not going to be that guy. But if you're expecting a guy to play 1,000 snaps, that's kind of his MO. He's going to go out there. He's going to make a lot of tackles. I think he set his career high in tackles last year. He's willing to be around the ball. He can play a couple of different positions, so you can use him in the nickel if you need to. They probably won't need to, but like you can do that if you want. You can sign him up as a dime linebacker from time to time. There's a couple of things you can do with Xavier Woods. This is probably the signing that I am the most encouraged by. Of just like, yeah, that's a guy who's going to do his job.
Player.
I can trust him in the way that people were talking about Zeitler. That is the way I'll talk about Xavier Woods. Like, I can trust that guy to do the thing he needs to do. And honestly, I know this is an unpopular opinion given what this fan base wanted. I would have taken a contract like this over Javon Holland 10 times out of 10. Like, you can go get a 1-year rental at safety every year. You can go get Quandre Diggs 1 year. Yeah.
Like, I thought Diggs was a very, like, if he wasn't hurt, if Quandre Diggs ended up playing the season, I would have said that was a no-brainer. You bring him back. Like, even at his age, like, that is a guy who, you know, maybe a little bit different leadership style, but is a guy who, you know, is going to go out there, and as long as he doesn't get hurt, he's going to be dependable for you. And I think that's the same thing you're getting with a guy like Xavier Woods, for sure. Go
get a player who you're never going to have to worry about. Like, upside is great, and I love upside, but I think kind of the theme of this show is dependability, and that's a dependable dude.
Yeah, and I think that's the theme of, as Joe says, like, durability and dependability for a lot of these free agents, I think, is where you're headed with this team, setting them up to maybe not have as many questions of having rotating personnel carousels as they did last year. And that leaves them now, including the Kenneth Murray trade, with their draft picks looking like this. You have the first overall pick. You have the 35th in the second. You have 2 fourths, including the first pick in the 4th, and Seattle's pick from the Ernest Jones trade. You have your 5th round pick with another 5th from, I believe, the L'Jarius Sneed trade is where they got this, or a different trade.
The Hopkins trade.
Hopkins trade, correct. So you have Kansas City's 5th. You have your 6th, and you improve your 7th to Dallas's 6th in the Kenneth Murray trade. We've talked about it a lot, but so that's where they are with the drafts. You have 2 4ths, 2 5ths, 2 6ths, a 1st and a 2nd. Would you feel really, really good if you had that 3rd? Yes. But at this point, I think I'm fine with where their draft capital is at. You'd always like to have another top 100 pick, but like currently with where this team is, I think they're fine.
Yeah.
Or like you said, Daniel says that was Malik's, the Green Bay 7th. They moved the Green Bay 7th for Dallas to improve, which, that's fine. Where do they go from here, though? The one position we haven't talked about where they signed a player is wide receiver. They signed Van Jefferson. It's Van Jefferson. Like the most intriguing thing I've seen out of the reaction of signing Van Jefferson is people going back to his Florida tape and posting his highlights, which I think is all you need to know about Van Jefferson. The Titans still need a wide receiver too. Where they find that, I don't know. It's most likely in one of those 4th, 5th, or 6th, probably the 4th in the draft there. Is there a guy that they can go out and sign? Cooper Kupp has been floated around at his $11 to $12 million, what he's looking for, $11 to $12 million. I'm not doing that personally for a guy who it would be going, as we talked about in this show, dependability and being available on the field is not Cooper Kupp's MO. And so if you're looking to pay that guy the $11 to $12 million that you're paying all these other guys, you're going against the grain there. And so Van Jefferson, a role player, maybe not one of my favorite role players that I would have went and got for them, but you got to still address the wide receiver room. How they do that, I think, is still very much a mystery. I do think, if anything, this indicates that, and there's been a lot of talk about this, but like we joked about it in training camp and the preseason, but like Bryce Oliver, wide receiver 3 season is loading people. I think they think in moving off of NWI, like you have your NWI replacement at home and it's Bryce Oliver. And I think that's where you're going to find your wide receiver 4. Van Jefferson's going to be your wide receiver 3. You get your wide receiver 2 in the draft, and Calvin Ridley's your bona fide 1. And that's going to have to be enough right now.
The thing that's making me laugh of a couple of comments about Elijah Moore here, just signing guys who know A.J. Brown at this point. Van Jefferson, former college teammate of A.J. Brown. Elijah Moore, former college teammate of A.J. Brown. Just get the guys who are friends with AJ to maybe build the bridge back 4 years down the line. No, I mean, there's a comment a couple minutes ago about the Commanders model, and I think some of you guys know I talked to Chad Brinker about this, about how much he likes the Commanders model. And the difference between what the Titans are doing now and what the Commanders did last year is that a lot of the Commanders' one-year deals were $3-4 million contracts. The Titans' one-year deals are sitting at 8 to 10. Like, they're still forking over a little bit more money to get a little bit more of a premium than what the Commanders did. But I also think it's really telling that when I talked to him about the Commander stuff, he also brought up what Brandon Beane did when he got to Buffalo and what Brad Holmes did when he got to Detroit. And those are two people that they really kicked off their tenures by making a lot of trades that were unpopular in the moment. Brandon Beane especially traded off of a lot of very prominent former top draft picks, like Sammy Watkins, and I think Jordan Poyer might have been one of the guys, Reggie Ragland, Marcel Darius, like a lot of guys. The Kenneth Murray trade might be indicative of that too, of like, I'm not saying this based off of like, oh, I've got something ready down the pike, just listen. But like, if you're kind of synthesizing these two things that he said of complimenting what the Commanders did, but also studying what the Bills and Lions did for their turnarounds, I think that signing the short contracts is only one part of the deal. I think that the other part of the deal is you got to get more capital, and that means trading off assets at some point.
Yeah. And what that means for what they have right now, I think is intriguing. We still have so long to go. Does that mean there's been a lot of talk about a guy like Jeffrey Simmons? Like, is that still on the table? I would not think so because
skeptical.
I'd be skeptical of that, but I think that is still at this point plausible that you could find trade value, and we could see some coming down the line. We are still very, like, day 2 of the new league year. Like, there's still so much time to go before the NFL draft. Like, things can always change in an instant, and we've seen already this week that they have. And so I think that's where they're headed right now. You see them starting to build what their next move is. I think will be super interesting. But I think that's where we're going to wrap it up. Nick, I know you have a lot of work, one of the busiest weeks for you over at the Tennessean. What do you got? What are you working on over there? What do you got coming up?
Yeah, we'll pass on that till next week. I'm working on breaking news. There's a lot of stuff going on, right? And a lot
Fair
of the
enough.
stuff that
Right.
we've talked about today.
Yeah,
we'll talk about more stuff next week. I've got a lot of stuff coming down the pike as we get ready for draft season. Some cool stories I'm working on. But for now, let's talk about free agency. Let's talk about this roster. Let's talk about having an offensive line.
Yeah, I agree with you there. If you guys enjoyed today's show, we'll be on the 440 network. We got Paul Kaharski coming up at 12:30 in an hour and a half. So his thoughts on this roster, and then yours truly here, filling in for Braden Gall, will be back on the Hot Read podcast this Friday, talking about any other moves, what we think, myself and Stoney Keeley think of these moves, and getting into more of that there. But this has been a football show. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Shotgun Willie's Barbecue. Make sure to check them out at the links below. And until next week, we'll talk to you then.